The story of humanity begins long before the first people walked the earth. It begins in the silent darkness of space, where a cloud of cosmic dust slowly swirled around a young star. Over millions of years, this dust collided, merged, and formed planets. Among them was a glowing sphere of molten rock that would become our home, Earth. At first, it was a violent, hostile world. Volcanoes erupted endlessly, seas of lava covered its surface, and the atmosphere was filled with toxic gases. But as the planet cooled, water vapor condensed and rain fell for thousands of years. Oceans formed. Lightning struck the waters endlessly, and sunlight fueled chemical reactions deep within the oceans. And somewhere in those ancient seas, life appeared. It is one of the greatest mysteries of science. Perhaps it was a simple molecule capable of copying itself. Perhaps it was more complex. But whatever it was, it became the ancestor of everything that would ever live. For billions of years, life existed only in the oceans. Tiny organisms evolved into more complex creatures. Plants spread across the land. Animals followed. Giant reptiles, the dinosaurs, ruled the earth for over 150 million years. But their reign ended suddenly when a massive asteroid struck Earth. Darkness filled the sky, temperatures dropped, and almost all life vanished. Yet from this destruction came opportunity. Small mammals survived, adapted, and evolved. Among them were the ancestors of humans. For millions of years, our early relatives changed slowly. They learned to walk upright. Their brains grew. They used tools of stone, bone, and wood. They explored plains, forests, and mountains. But something extraordinary happened around 2.5 million years ago, the emergence of the first members of the genus Homo. They were not yet human as we know it, but they were different from anything before. They shaped stones into blades. They hunted cooperatively. They cared for their young longer. They shared food. But it was Homo erectus, the upright human, who became the first true traveler of the world. They left Africa, crossed the Middle East, reached Asia and Europe. They controlled fire, warmed themselves, cooked food, and protected themselves from predators. Fire changed everything. Cooked food provided more energy. Campfires brought people together at night. Stories, perhaps the first myths, were born around the flames. Over hundreds of thousands of years, new species appeared. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia. They were strong, intelligent, and capable hunters. Denisovans lived in parts of Asia. And then, around 300,000 years ago, our species emerged, Homo sapiens. At first, we were just one of several human species, but we had something unique, the ability to imagine what did not yet exist, the ability to think symbolically, to plan ahead, to believe in things unseen, to communicate with depth and subtlety, to cooperate in large groups. This ability would change the world forever. Around 70,000 years ago, a cognitive revolution occurred. Humans developed language in its complex form. They created art, carved figurines, painted animals on cave walls. They shared knowledge, ideas, warnings, and dreams. They traveled farther, across deserts, rivers, and seas. Within a few thousand years, Homo sapiens reached Australia, hunted giant animals, and adapted to new environments. Around 40,000 years ago, they arrived in Europe, where they met the Neanderthals. For a time, both species coexisted. They interbred. They exchanged knowledge. But slowly, Neanderthals disappeared. Climate change, competition, and small population size played a role. They left behind only traces in our DNA. Humans continued their journey. Around 20,000 years ago, the world was in the grip of the last ice age. Massive sheets of ice covered the north. Sea levels dropped, exposing land bridges. Humans walked into Siberia, crossed the Bering Land Bridge, and entered the Americas, a vast, untouched continent full of new creatures. They spread from Alaska to South America in a few thousand years. Everywhere humans went, They adapted to their environment. Hunters in the Arctic built shelters from bones and ice. Tribes on islands learned to sail across dangerous waters. Peoples in warm climates gathered fruit, hunted, and developed early rituals. For tens of thousands of years, humanity lived as nomads. They followed the seasons. They respected the rhythm of nature. Their lives were difficult, but they were free. But everything changed around 12,000 years ago, a turning point known as the Neolithic Revolution. The Ice Age ended, temperatures rose, rains returned, and in several regions of the world, people discovered that plants could be grown, animals could be domesticated, and food could be stored. In the Fertile Crescent, the region stretching from Mesopotamia to Egypt, people grew wheat, barley, peas, and lentils. They built the first permanent settlements. They learned to tame goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle. They created tools to plow the land, ovens to bake bread, methods to store grain for winter. Agriculture changed everything. When people stopped wandering, populations grew quickly. Villages became towns, towns became cities. With more food came time. Time to build, to create, to think, to organize. And in the valleys of the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus and the Yellow River, the first civilizations emerged. These civilizations developed writing to record harvests and debts. They built temples to honor gods. They created governments to manage land and water. They invented mathematics, calendars, and early forms of law. Humanity had entered a new age, the age of civilization. And this is where our story truly begins. In Part 2, we witness the rise of Sumer, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the birth of cities, kings, and written history. As the Ice Age ended and the world warmed, rivers flowed stronger, forests expanded, and fertile valleys appeared across the continents. Humanity, once made up of small wandering tribes, began to settle. The shift from nomadic life to permanent communities was not sudden. It took thousands of years of experimentation, planting seeds, taming animals, observing the seasons. But once agriculture took root, the world changed irreversibly. People no longer depended solely on hunting and gathering. They could store food. They could survive winter. They could raise larger families. And where food grew abundant, populations grew. Villages became towns. Towns expanded into the first cities in human history. And with cities came something humanity had never experienced before: complexity. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia, the first true civilization emerged. This land, which the Greeks later called the cradle of civilization, was home to the Sumerians. Their cities, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, were unlike anything the world had seen. They built walls, canals, markets, temples, and the earliest forms of government. Rising above the cities were ziggurats, massive step pyramids dedicated to the gods. These structures symbolized not only faith, but also the organization and coordination required to build them. Sumerians were the first to develop writing. Their system, cuneiform, began as simple marks pressed into clay tablets used to record grain, livestock, and debts. But over time, writing evolved into a tool for preserving myths, laws, and histories. When writing appeared, memory no longer died with the storyteller. Knowledge became permanent. With writing came administration. With administration came government. Sumerian city-states were ruled by Lugal, kings who combined religious and political authority. They commanded armies, organized irrigation, and controlled trade. But with cities growing in size and strength, competition intensified. Wars between city-states became common. Armies marched across Mesopotamia, capturing land, controlling water, and asserting dominance. Through these conflicts, the idea of empire was born. North of Sumer, in the city of Akkad, a new power began to rise. Under Sargon of Akkad, the Akkadian Empire was formed, the world's first true empire. Sargon was a visionary ruler and brilliant strategist. He conquered Sumer, united the cities, expanded his territory to the Mediterranean, and created a unified system of administration across a vast region. His rule proved that one man, one state, could control nations and cultures far beyond their homeland. But empires rise and fall. After centuries of power, the Akkadian Empire collapsed under invasions, rebellions, and famine. Yet the idea of empire remained, and new civilizations soon filled the vacuum. In the south of Mesopotamia, the city-state of Babylon rose to prominence. Under King Hammurabi, Babylon became a center of law, order, and power. Hammurabi created one of the earliest legal codes, the Code of Hammurabi, carved into stone for all to see. Although harsh by modern standards, it was revolutionary. It established rules, rights, punishments, and responsibilities. It declared that even the weak had protection, and that justice was not arbitrary but written. Meanwhile, along the Nile River, another great civilization awakened: Egypt. Unlike Mesopotamia, where cities fought endlessly for dominance, Egypt was blessed with natural unity. The Nile's annual flooding brought rich soil that allowed for stable agriculture. Mountains and deserts protected the region from invasions. Out of this stability emerged one of history's most iconic civilizations. Egyptian rulers, known as pharaohs, were not merely kings, they were considered gods on earth. Their authority was absolute, and their legacy monumental. They built pyramids, colossal tombs meant to ensure eternal life. They constructed temples aligned with stars. They developed writing, hieroglyphics, both artistic and symbolic. Egyptian society was highly organized. Priests recorded the calendar. Scribes managed taxes. Farmers cultivated the land. Soldiers protected borders. Craftsmen built monuments that would survive for thousands of years. At the same time, further east, another mysterious civilization emerged: the Indus Valley Civilization, centered around the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. These cities had straight streets, drainage systems, public baths, and standardized bricks, a level of urban planning that stunned archaeologists. Yet their writing remains undeciphered, their rulers unknown, and their fate mysterious. In China, along the Yellow River, early dynasties began to form. They developed bronze weapons, ritual vessels, oracle bones, and early political systems. Chinese civilization grew around ancestor worship, social hierarchy, and the idea that rulers governed by the mandate of heaven, divine approval that could be lost if the ruler failed his duties. Meanwhile, trade connected these distant regions. Caravans moved copper, tin, gold, textiles, spices, and ideas. This exchange of goods and knowledge laid the foundation for a globalizing world. But as civilizations grew, so did their ambitions. Around 1200 BCE, after centuries of growth, innovation, and stability, the ancient world faced one of its greatest catastrophes: the Bronze Age collapse. Cities were burned, empires fell, peoples migrated, trade networks crashed. This collapse remains one of history's great mysteries. Some blame climate change, others blame invasions by sea peoples, others point to internal rebellions and famine. But one thing was clear: the old world was ending, and a new age would begin, one shaped by iron, war, and the rise of even greater empires. As the Bronze Age collapsed, the ancient world entered a period of rebuilding, turmoil, and transformation. Cities that once flourished were abandoned or destroyed. Trade routes that connected continents fell silent. But from the ashes of the old world rose new powers, stronger, more organized, and far more ambitious. The first among these were the Assyrians, a people hardened by the harsh landscapes of northern Mesopotamia. Their cities, Ashur, Nineveh, Nimrud, became centers of military innovation. The Assyrians transformed warfare. They built standing armies, trained soldiers year-round, and developed iron weapons that surpassed bronze. They used cavalry, siege towers, battering rams, and archers in coordinated attacks. Their armies were feared for their efficiency and brutality. When they conquered a region, they deported entire populations, resettling them across the empire to prevent rebellion. It was harsh, but effective. Under kings like Ashur-nasirpal II, Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, Sennacherib, and Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian Empire expanded from Mesopotamia to Egypt. Ashurbanipal, one of its last great rulers, created the first known library in history, the Library of Nineveh, filled with tablets that preserved Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian knowledge. But even the most powerful empires fall. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes destroyed Nineveh, ending Assyrian dominance. Babylon rose once more as a major power, ruled by the Chaldeans. Under King Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon was transformed into a city of marvels. Towering walls surrounded it. The Ishtar Gate, decorated with blue tiles and golden animals, became one of the wonders of the ancient world. Hammurabi's legacy of law and governance endured, but Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar added monumental architecture, astronomy, and scholarship. The Babylonians mapped the stars, predicted eclipses, and developed advanced mathematics. But their glory was short-lived. To the east, in the rugged mountains of Persia, a new power emerged under Cyrus the Great. Cyrus built the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the largest the world had ever seen at the time. But unlike the Assyrians, Cyrus ruled with tolerance. He allowed conquered peoples to keep their customs, religions, and leaders. He freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity. He built a network of roads, including the famous Royal Road, which connected the empire and allowed messages to travel at incredible speed. The Persians introduced standardized coins, weights, and measures. Under Darius I, the empire reached its peak, stretching from Egypt to India. Darius built Persepolis, a ceremonial capital of extraordinary beauty. Massive columns, carved reliefs, and monumental staircases celebrated the unity of dozens of nations within the empire. But Persia faced a challenge from an unlikely source: a collection of small city-states scattered across the rocky peninsula of Greece. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each with its own government, traditions, and rivalries. These city-states shared a common language and religion, yet they fought each other constantly. When Persia attempted to conquer Greece, the Greeks united in a rare moment of solidarity. At Marathon, fewer than 10,000 Athenians defeated a much larger Persian force. At Thermopylae, a small group of Spartans led by King Leonidas held off a massive Persian army, sacrificing themselves to buy time for Greece. At Salamis, the Greek navy destroyed the Persian fleet. These victories changed history. They preserved the independence of the Greek world and allowed Greek culture to flourish. Athens entered its golden age. Under Pericles, the city became a center of philosophy, art, theater, and democracy. Socrates questioned everything, urging people to examine their lives and beliefs. Plato envisioned a perfect state ruled by philosopher kings. Aristotle explored logic, biology, politics, and ethics, creating systems of thought that shaped science and philosophy for thousands of years. Greek architecture, with its columns and symmetry, became the foundation of Western design. Greek theater explored tragedy, comedy, and the human condition. Greek historians like Herodotus and Thucydides tried to record events objectively, analyzing causes and consequences. While Athens embraced culture and democracy, Sparta focused on discipline and military strength. Together, the Greek world formed a dynamic contrast of ideas, values, and systems, a laboratory for the future of Western civilization. But internal conflict shattered Greek unity. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta weakened both sides. And from the north, another power watched and prepared: Macedon. Under King Philip II and later his son, Alexander the Great, Macedon united Greece through diplomacy, marriage, and war. Alexander inherited his father's ambitions and surpassed them. In little more than a decade, he conquered the Persian Empire, marched through Egypt, crossed Mesopotamia, and reached India. He founded cities, most famously Alexandria, which became centers of trade, learning, and culture. Alexander spread Greek ideas across 3 continents, creating the Hellenistic world, a fusion of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian cultures. After his death, his empire fragmented, but his influence endured. Greek became the international language of science, philosophy, and diplomacy. Meanwhile, on the Italian peninsula, a small city was rising silently: Rome. At first, Rome was just one of many tribes and kingdoms, but it possessed traits that would one day build an empire: discipline, engineering skill, political innovation, and a fierce sense of identity. Rome learned from the civilizations around it: Greek philosophy, Etruscan engineering, Phoenician trade, and combined these influences into something new. The Roman Republic developed a complex political system with elected officials, checks and balances, and a legal code that would shape future governments. Roman soldiers, disciplined and organized, expanded Rome's territory steadily. Rome built roads, bridges, fortresses, and aqueducts, engineering marvels that connected its vast lands. Its armies defeated rivals in Italy, then battled Carthage in the Punic Wars, a struggle that spanned generations. Hannibal, Carthage's greatest general, crossed the Alps with elephants, striking fear into Rome. But despite early victories, he ultimately fell to the Roman general Scipio Africanus. With Carthage destroyed, Rome dominated the Western Mediterranean. Its ambition only grew, and as Rome expanded, it transformed from a republic into an empire. Julius Caesar, brilliant general, cunning politician, ruthless strategist, rose to power through conquest and charisma. His victories in Gaul made him a hero to the people and a threat to the Senate. Civil war erupted. Caesar emerged victorious, but his growing power led to his assassination by senators who feared the end of the Republic. Yet the Republic was already dead. After another civil war, Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, later known as Augustus, became Rome's first emperor. Under Augustus, Rome entered a golden age, Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For 2 centuries, the empire flourished. Cities grew, trade flowed, roads connected distant lands, languages mixed, cultures blended, gladiators fought in arenas, philosophers debated in forums. And across the empire, Roman law brought order, sometimes harsh but often remarkably advanced. Rome became the beating heart of the ancient world. Its influence stretched from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia. But as Rome expanded, pressure mounted. Internal corruption, economic inequality, barbarian invasions, and political instability weakened the empire. The world was preparing for one of its greatest turning points: the fall of Rome and the birth of a new age. As the medieval world matured, new powers emerged that would reshape continents. In the vast grasslands of Central Asia, where endless horizons met a restless sky, nomadic tribes lived in harsh conditions that forged resilience, discipline, and unmatched horsemanship. From these tribes arose one of the most transformative leaders in human history, Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan. Born into poverty, betrayed by allies, orphaned and hunted, Temujin forged alliances through charisma, strategy, and relentless determination. In 1206, he united the Mongol clans, becoming Genghis Khan, universal ruler. What followed was one of the fastest and most devastating expansions ever seen. Mongol armies moved with incredible speed. They carried multiple horses each, enabling long-distance travel. Their archers fired with deadly accuracy even while riding at full gallop. Their tactics were innovative: feigned retreats, coordinated assaults, psychological warfare, intelligence networks, and rapid communication. They adapted the technology of conquered peoples, siege engines from China, administration methods from Persia, creating a machine of conquest that seemed unstoppable. The Mongols swept across Asia. They destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, conquered northern China, crushed kingdoms from Korea to Persia, and approached Europe. Kiev fell in 1240. Poland and Hungary suffered devastating defeats. Only the death of the Great Khan in Mongolia stopped their advance into Central Europe. The Mongol Empire split into four major khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in the Russian steppes. Though brutal on the battlefield, Mongol rule brought surprising stability. They created the largest continuous land empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. For almost a century, the Silk Road flourished under Mongol protection. Trade caravans moved spices, silk, porcelain, furs, metalwork, and knowledge across thousands of kilometers. Ideas traveled freely. Medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy spread between Islamic, Chinese, Indian, and European worlds. The Mongols connected civilizations that had previously been distant and isolated. But the empire eventually weakened due to internal conflict, plague, local rebellions, and the sheer difficulty of ruling such vast lands. China expelled the Mongols and established the Ming dynasty in 1368. In the Middle East and Russia, new powers rose on the Mongol ruins. Yet the Mongol legacy remained. Global trade networks, diplomatic exchanges, and cultural interactions that reshaped the world. During the same era, the Black Death struck. Originating likely in Central Asia, it moved along trade routes and devastated cities from China to Europe. Between 1347 and 1351, Europe lost nearly half its population. Entire towns vanished, fields went untilled, trade collapsed, but paradoxically, the plague also transformed society. Labor shortages empowered peasants, weakened feudalism, increased wages, and shifted power away from the nobility. Over time, Europe emerged stronger, more flexible, and more open to change, and soon a cultural revolution began: the Renaissance. Born in Italy during the 14th century, the Renaissance was a rebirth of art, science, philosophy, and human creativity. Inspired by Greek and Roman knowledge preserved by Byzantines and the Islamic world, thinkers sought new ways of understanding humanity and the universe. Florence became a cradle of genius. Leonardo da Vinci explored anatomy, mechanics, flight, and painting with unmatched curiosity. Michelangelo carved David and painted the Sistine Chapel, capturing the beauty and complexity of the human form. Petrarch, Dante, and later Shakespeare transformed literature. Architects designed buildings with symmetry, perspective, and balance. Scholars questioned old assumptions. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 accelerated this transformation. Knowledge that once belonged to the elite now spread to merchants, craftsmen, and farmers. Books became affordable. Ideas moved quickly. The scientific revolution took shape. Copernicus declared that Earth revolved around the sun. Galileo proved it with telescopes. Kepler revealed the laws of planetary motion. Newton unified gravity and motion into a single framework. Reason and evidence became the foundations of knowledge. New technologies appeared. Advanced navigation tools, improved ship designs, better maps. Europe was ready to explore. In 1492, Christopher Columbus reached the Americas. Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa to India. Magellan's expedition circumnavigated the globe. The world suddenly became interconnected. But exploration brought tragedy. European diseases destroyed indigenous civilizations in the Americas. Colonization brought exploitation, slavery, and suffering to millions. The transatlantic slave trade forced tens of millions of Africans into brutal labor across the Americas. Yet global trade intensified. Silver from the Americas flowed to Europe and Asia. Spices, textiles, tea, and porcelain moved between continents. New foods, potatoes, tomatoes, corn, chocolate, transformed diets worldwide. The world became global. Meanwhile, empires rose and fell across Asia and the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire expanded from Anatolia, capturing Constantinople in 1453 and ending the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became a center of trade and culture. The Safavid Empire ruled Persia, shaping Shia Islam. The Mughal Empire flourished in India, building architectural masterpieces like the Taj Mahal. China's Ming Dynasty stabilized the country, expanded trade, built the Forbidden City, and saw the voyages of Zheng He, massive fleets that explored Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and Africa. Yet China later turned inward, halting maritime exploration and missing the naval revolution that would soon reshape the world. Europe entered its own age of empire. Spain, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands fought for control of seas and continents. Colonies spread across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Wealth flowed to Europe. But inequality grew. Tensions rose. In the 18th century, revolutions erupted. The American Revolution created a new republic. The French Revolution overthrew monarchy, inspired democratic ideals, and unleashed chaos and transformation. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. Machines replaced hand labor, steam engines powered factories, trains, and ships. Cities grew rapidly as millions sought work. New inventions transformed daily life. Electricity, telegraphs, telephones, photography, vaccines. Industries expanded: steel, coal, textiles, chemicals. But industrialization brought harsh conditions, pollution, dangerous labor, and rapid urbanization. Social movements demanded rights, reforms, and representation. Nations united and competed. Germany and Italy formed unified states. Imperial ambition intensified in Africa and Asia. The world was now interconnected, industrialized, and primed for both progress and conflict. As the 20th century approached, humanity stood at the brink of its most violent and transformative era. 2 world wars, ideological battles, scientific breakthroughs, and the birth of a global society were on the horizon. The 20th century opened with extraordinary optimism. Science was advancing, cities were growing, and global trade connected continents like never before. Humanity believed it was entering a golden age of progress. But beneath the surface, rivalries between empires, military buildups, and nationalist tensions were boiling. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo triggered a chain reaction. Alliances activated, armies mobilized. Within weeks, Europe descended into World War I. It was unlike any war before. Machine guns, artillery, barbed wire, and poison gas turned battlefields into deadly wastelands. Millions of soldiers fought in trenches stretching across Europe. The war dragged on for 4 years, destroying empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire fell apart. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. Imperial Russia descended into revolution as the Bolsheviks took power, forming the Soviet Union. Germany was defeated and forced into harsh conditions that later fueled resentment and extremism. The world hoped the tragedy of World War I would be the last. But the peace that followed was fragile. Economic crises, political extremism, and authoritarian movements grew. In Germany, Adolf Hitler rose to power, promising national revival and blaming minorities for the nation's suffering. Fascist regimes appeared in Italy, and militaristic leaders gained influence in Japan. By 1939, Europe was on the brink again. When Germany invaded Poland, World War II began. This war was even larger and more destructive than the first. German blitzkrieg tactics swept across Europe. France fell. Britain fought alone. the Soviet Union endured enormous losses when Germany invaded in 1941. In Asia, Japan expanded across China and the Pacific. The United States joined the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The conflict became global, fought in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the oceans. At its core was a battle against fascism, racism, and genocide. The Holocaust, engineered by the Nazi regime, murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others: Roma, Slavs, disabled people, political prisoners. Entire communities vanished in one of humanity's darkest crimes. But the tide of war eventually turned. The Soviet Union pushed westward. The Allies invaded Normandy. Germany collapsed in 1945. In the Pacific, Japan fought desperately until the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, demonstrating the terrifying new power humanity had unleashed. World War II ended with devastation on a scale never seen. Tens of millions were dead. Cities lay in ruins. The global order had to be rebuilt. The United Nations was created to promote peace and cooperation, but peace was short-lived. A new conflict began, not directly on battlefields, but in politics, ideology, and global influence: the Cold War. The world split into two power blocks: the United States and its allies, promoting capitalism and democracy, and the Soviet Union, promoting communism. Both sides possessed nuclear weapons powerful enough to destroy the world. The fear of mutual destruction prevented direct war, but proxy conflicts erupted across the globe: Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, parts of Africa, and Latin America. The space race became a symbol of Cold War rivalry. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. The United States responded by landing humans on the moon in 1969. For the first time, humanity saw Earth from space, a fragile, beautiful planet shared by all. Meanwhile, science, medicine, and technology advanced rapidly. Antibiotics saved millions of lives. Computers began as giant machines and evolved quickly. Electronics transformed communication and industry. Global trade accelerated. Former colonies gained independence across Africa and Asia. Civil rights movements demanded equality. Social norms shifted. The world was changing, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union weakened due to economic strain and political pressure. In 1991, it dissolved, ending the Cold War. A unipolar world emerged, dominated by the United States economically and militarily. Europe grew more integrated, forming the European Union. China adopted economic reforms and began rising as a global power. The Internet connected humanity in ways unimaginable just decades before. Information flowed instantly. Social networks reshaped communication. Smartphones placed computing power in every hand. The early 21st century brought hope and crisis. Terrorist attacks shook nations. Wars in the Middle East reshaped geopolitics. The global financial crisis of 2008 exposed economic vulnerabilities. Climate change accelerated, threatening ecosystems and societies. Yet extraordinary breakthroughs continued. Renewable energy, biotechnology, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, quantum research. Humanity's ability to understand and manipulate the world grew rapidly. But with these advances came new questions. How should powerful technologies be used? What happens when machines learn, adapt, and innovate? How will nations cooperate in a world facing global challenges? The pandemic of 2020 reminded humanity of its fragility. Borders closed, economies halted, millions died. But science responded with unprecedented speed, developing vaccines in record time. The crisis showed the interconnectedness of modern civilization, both its strengths and vulnerabilities. Today, humanity stands at the edge of a new era. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries, creativity, and knowledge. Space exploration has resumed with new ambitions: permanent moon bases, missions to Mars, and commercial spaceflight. Climate change is forcing nations to rethink energy, agriculture, and global cooperation. Technology is merging with biology, creating possibilities once imagined only in science fiction. Yet the fundamental story remains the same. Humanity adapts, survives, learns, and evolves. From the first sparks of fire to the glow of screens, from stone tools to quantum processors, from small tribes to global civilizations, from myths around the campfire to satellites orbiting the Earth. The journey of humanity is a story of creativity, struggle, resilience, and an unending desire to understand the world and our place in it. And although this story has covered hundreds of thousands of years, it is far from over. In fact, the true story of humanity may only be beginning, shaped by choices we make today, innovations we create tomorrow, and the imagination that will lead us into the centuries ahead.